Today, we're going to spend some time discussing the process of theorizing. Um, this lecture material is going to come from chapter 1 of your Ritzer and Stepniski, your RS textbook. So the smaller one with the nice boxes and summaries and things like that. Theorizing at its most basic level involves thinking and speculating on various social issues. This is so-called everyday theorizing, as you'll see in your book, and it's something that all people do. Whenever you speculate about some circumstance, you're theorizing. So whenever you think, I wonder why that happened, and you provide an answer for yourself, you're theorizing. This can occur in a variety of ways and circumstances because it involves a single but non-specific thought process. So again, when you think, why did this happen? Why did they do that? You're theorizing. When you question, how did this happen? Here meaning the process of events which resulted in some circumstance, you are theorizing. Sociological theory is a little bit more of a formal process than everyday theorizing, and it involves incorporating the work of previous theorists, relying on data, publication, and peer review, and inclusive incorporation of a broad range of social issues. Sociological theory is a set of interrelated ideas that allow for, one, the systematization of knowledge of the social world. So here, kind of the standardized understanding of the social world, things that some people might understand as objective. That's systematization. Two, the explanation of that world. And three, predictions about the future of that world. Theories addressed in your RS and separately your Kavisto or your K texts are considered full-fledged sociological theories by a large number of sociologists. So keep this in mind when you begin to notice that some theories covered may not meet the entire listed criteria, that they're included because of kind of general acceptance in the field. Now remember that most, but not all sociologists accept the theories covered this semester as sociological and theoretical. The traditional or dated understanding of sociological theory does not account for subjective assessment of theory within the field of sociology. So we'll start to get a little bit further away from this as we move further through the semester. I'm seeing that 2 people are confused. Do I have 2 questions? Alrighty, well, if you decide that you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat. I have that open and I will be able to see it on my screen. So why is it important that most, but not all sociologists accept these theories? Well, there's no objective or uniformly agreed upon list of theories that are core to the field of sociology. So here considered vital to this sociological understanding of the social world. Instead, what we have, it's called the canon. Here, canon with one N, not cannon like the weapon that fires. And also canon, not like the camera. So here, canon is an abstract space that holds sociologists. So the sociological canon is defined as the theories, ideas, and texts that are, at least in the past, considered the most important in the field of sociology. Critics argue that the canon is not a neutral construction, rather that it's affected by power and the politics of the theory. Conservative theories and theories by white theorists, for example, have been historically more likely to be canonized. The canon has also historically privileged theories that have testable hypotheses, what are known as the positivist theories, or as we'll introduce first, your empiricists. And the canon also has privileged theories produced by white men faculty who are often identified as the majority group in quotations, within sociology, even by sociologists ourselves. Critics have made it possible for many other perspectives to become included, such as emancipatory, feminist, and queer theories. So the canon has actually expanded in the last 30 or so years to account for the reality of the field, which is not that the majority group is white men, actually that women make up the majority of sociology faculty. And while this women majority was historically white, the number of women, including and especially women of color in sociology, is continuing to grow, and is substantially outpacing the growth of white men in sociology. So the current canon is going to reflect the influence of Black feminist scholars such as Patricia Hill Collins. Here I have the cover of her book, Black Feminist Thought. It's also going to include the efforts of the Association of Black Sociologists to promote recognizing W.E.B. Du Bois and the Atlanta School of Sociology as the origin of American sociology. The canon is just the collection, correct. Any other questions?
Can you repeat the definition of the canon again?
Yes. So the canon is going to be the theories, ideas, and texts that have been considered the most important historically in the field of sociology. So we'll start with the ones that have historically been the most focused on, but we're going to also expand to what the canon looks like now, if that makes sense. Any other questions before I move to our next slide? Alrighty. So let's pause. And in your woo clap, I want you to answer right now. I'm feeling most excited or secure about, and then I want you to pick a response. So 1, creating theory, the deductive or empiricist approach. Creating theory, the inductive or philosopher approach. Explaining theoretical propositions. Applying theoretical propositions. Extending theoretical propositions, and critiquing theoretical gaps. A lot of this is assessing your background knowledge, so this is not necessarily something you should have gained from this first part of lecture. All right. Good. So it looks like 48%, the majority, the strongest percent, is going to be feeling comfortable applying theoretical propositions. So that's good. I think that that's an excellent place to start off in, and that's going to be really the first thing that we're doing. The next was going to be explaining the theoretical propositions, which is going to be the second thing that we do. So we'll move through these things, and you'll probably get this question again a few times through the semester. Moving forward, we're going to explore the canon, but not always in chronological or linear time order. Figure 1.1 in your RS textbook groups the major theorists whose theories are part of the canon by their age. So that's why I show you this chart. We are not going to necessarily group these theorists by age. So you can kind of see over time how these theories and theoretical paradigms emerged and kind of lasted or didn't last. Go ahead and refer back to this figure for context as we're moving through the course readings. So the first theorists we're going to explore are W.E.B. Du Bois, Emile Durkheim, Karl Marx, and Max Weber. So I have them circled here on your figure 1.1. These theorists are grouped because their theoretical writings explore how power is related to social inequality, but also because their theories are considered grand theories. So in this case, Du Bois, Durkheim, Marx, and Weber are all trying to provide overarching explanations for society. And these explanations are going to be rooted in the assumption that power and inequality exist and that they're related and that they're core to the functioning of Western colonial society. So here kind of focusing on power and inequality as related to each other, but also core to the societies that they're theorizing about. Their explanations are going to be similar, but you can see from figure 1.1 that their writings covered about a century of social life. So they go from the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s, all while focusing on Western colonial societies. Each of these theorists were operating in different areas of the Western imperial world. So Marx, Weber, and Durkheim were European sociologists. They spent much of their time in England, Germany, and France. Du Bois is increasingly seen as the father of American sociology, and he obviously is from the United States. Du Bois is going to be especially important for our own understanding, us here at UGA. And it's going to be especially important, not just for understanding these theories, but also how they apply and what they say about American society because of our location here in Georgia. So thinking back to a few minutes ago, I mentioned the Atlanta School of Sociology. Du Bois founded the Atlanta School of Sociology. Some sociology theory courses center around the Chicago School as foundational for American sociology. So you might have heard this in another class or even your intro class. But it's increasingly contested within the field. And we're going to center around the Atlanta School, given our position here in Georgia and the changing field-wide understanding about the roots of American sociology. So keeping in mind that the Atlanta School emerged prior to the Chicago School chronologically or in linear time order. So it would technically qualify as the first. We're going to discuss these four theorists in two groups. So we're going to look at the empiricists, this positivist approach, and then we're going to look at the philosophers. We're going to try to get through all of the empiricist material today, and then on Friday, we will talk about our philosophers. Empirical means theoretically rooted research. Du Bois and Durkheim both execute scientific studies and draw theory from their findings. So they're using deductive reasoning, here deriving theory from observable fact. Marx and Weber provide theory, but instead they use inductive reasoning. So they propose a theory based on untested, but what are supposed to be testable assumptions. This chart here is going to show the difference. So here you see the empiricists begin with observation and draw assumptions to create theory, while the philosophers begin in the opposite direction with the assumptions in theory, proposing ideas which may then be tested by other people. Contemporary theories that use deductive reasoning have also come to be known as grounded theory. This is because theorist Kathy Sharmas formalized the use of deductive reasoning to build theory by outlining distinct steps to use this kind of reasoning as a method of social research. So here, describing the process of deductive reasoning as a research method in and of itself. So this was in the early 1990s. We are probably not going to cover Sharmas, that's why I mention it now, beyond her contributions here to theorizing. I mean, this is because she is a medical sociologist or was a medical sociologist. The medical sociologist, SOCI 3100 course usually explores her work in depth, but I'm happy to provide more information in student hours or if you request it in your topic 8 special topics request. Pause here to switch to our other slideshow. All right, so our first major theoretical topic is going to be power and inequality, our structural approaches. In part 1, we're going to look at our early or our grand theories. So in module 1. Module 2, we're going to look at structural functionalists who come a little bit later. So keeping in mind that this is going to extend a little bit into module 2. You do not need to know the dates for the philosophers for your quizzes. So your quizzes are actually all going to be what are called anecdotal applications, which means that you're going to try and apply these theories, and you'll get to kind of choose, if we have a few theorists per section, you'll get to choose which theorist approach you would like to use to describe your own example. As promised, we have some more key terms, this time theoretical terms. You can find these and more terms also in your RS textbook. So first we have a proposition. This is going to be a declarative explanation of some social phenomenon. Strong theories provide propositions that are falsifiable. Falsifiable is an indication that a theoretical proposition or set of propositions can be tested using observed data. So here that you've proposed something that is realistic. We can prove it. The falsification process typically involves making a hypothesis or a directionality based prediction on the theoretical proposition at hand. So you would take this proposition and then you would say, I think that this increases the chances or decreases the chances of some outcome. A concept is going to be an idea that's used to describe some social phenomenon. Concepts may or may not be associated with a distinct theory. A theoretical application is going to be the use of theoretical propositions as intended by the theorist to explain a social phenomenon. And again, this is what a lot of you said you felt fairly comfortable with at this point. A theoretical gap will focus a lot on this. This is one of the core things that you learn in your theory class. This is going to be something that happens when a theory should or was intended to explain some phenomenon, but it doesn't explain some variation or part of that phenomenon. So for example, if you can find an exception to this rule, or if it applies mostly, but one proposition falls short, things like that. So our second activity, you can kind of work on as we move through here. So you can post these in messages. You can also post them direct to Twitter. We're going to do an exercise called tweeting theory. So I want you to imagine that you're at an academic conference and you've decided that you're going to provide running feedback on this presentation. So you're going to live tweet this lecture. Your goal is to provide a TLDR, or a too long didn't read, of the presentation using tweet threads. Think about what tweets you might send and which hashtags you might use. So I provided an example here. For example, at MedSoci on Wheels, that's my professional Twitter account, I would, for example, tweet exploring controversy over first school, hashtag School of Sociology over here, yikes, hashtag drama, hashtag Du Bois, hashtag Merton. So go ahead and post these into messages as we move through the rest of this presentation, or for bonus 10 points, you can tweet me directly on Twitter, and you'll get points that way. All right, so our empiricists. We're going to begin with W.E.B. Du Bois and Emile Durkheim. Remember that these theorists use deductive reasoning, meaning that they are proposing theory rooted in observation. W.E.B. Du Bois focused on race, particularly the situation of Black Americans, illustrating the role of the color line in dividing white and Black Americans in the 20th century and before. Du Bois's early writings pointed out that race had physical dimensions, racialism, but more importantly, that racial differences were to be found in cultural, spiritual, psychic, and religious forms. All of these were factors that were important, according to Du Bois, in the formation of racial identity. So here, looking at the key proposition, that race is going to be the most important variable for understanding 20th century society, both in the United States and globally. And that is because of Western imperialism reifying race. So this idea that race is socially constructed. So it's not an indicator of superiority or inferiority, but it is real because it's real and has a lasting impact that we can observe and measure. One of these impacts is what Du Bois calls the color line. He talks about there being a distinct and unequal social divide between Black society and white society in the 20th century United States. Here, seeing the residual effects of the colonial valuing of whiteness in unequal conditions for African Americans versus white Americans here in the US. Okay, I see we have the chat, but we've answered each other's questions. Excellent. So we're going to focus on theory and concepts drawn from Du Bois's most famous book, which is called The Souls of Black Folk, and I've included the cover of that book here. Du Boisian theory is premised on the idea that no social phenomenon in a post-colonial society may be fully explained without race. So again, that race is going to be the most important variable for understanding this 20th century society. Du Bois says that experiences are racialized. So here providing a word to describe the distinctly different experiences depending on race. The idea here, again, is because Western colonial imperialism was founded on notions of racial superiority, white superiority specifically, that any examination of society after this time must account for the pervasiveness of colonial ideology. So additionally, Du Bois says that this is going to be especially important in places like the United States that were founded during and only due to Western imperialism. So Du Bois is also considered a historian. He talks a lot about the founding of the United States and what that looked like and what it means. Importantly, Du Bois asserts that the importance of the United States is not inherently geographic. This, according to Du Bois, would likely not explain pre-colonial society in the Americas, meaning that applying Du Boisian theory to explain indigenous culture, for example, would be really inappropriate unless examining the post-colonial impact on indigenous peoples. So here, really focusing on this post-imperialist period. Keep this theoretical gap in mind, and you'll begin to notice this pattern among other grand theories that address power and inequality using a structural approach, that they're very westernized. It's going to become especially relevant when we discuss the emergence of anti-racist and anti-colonialist contemporary theory. So note that we're still on classical theory right now. All right. So Du Bois explains the importance of the color line by focusing on the impact of the color line on African American identity formation. Du Bois used the metaphor of a veil to show the socio-structural separation between Black and white. Double consciousness is a concept that shows the socio-psychological consequences. So what Du Bois says is Blacks who stand outside of dominant white society see themselves through their own community, but also through the dominant society. So they have what is called a two-ness. And this provides two forms of consciousness, or a double consciousness, a feeling of being split in two. Toward the latter years of his career, Du Bois incorporated Marxian economic analysis on racial economic inequality into his works. He also incorporated Marx's insights on the power of ideology, applying it to the pervasive racist messages perpetuated by white culture. I mention this because, as I stated in our last lecture, Marx tends to ignore all social variables except for class. Du Bois provides a more cohesive use of Marx. So the extra points are going to be for tweeting. Woo clap is just your regular lecture points, but if you tweet, then you'll get your lecture points plus your bonus. Du Bois is associated with the Atlanta School of Sociology. It was the first American school of thought, even though this has been historically ignored by sociologists in favor of Robert Merton and the Chicago School. So this is kind of the drama that I gave in my example tweet. Du Bois predicted what whiteness would be favored, that whiteness would be favored in this way. So he predicted actually that the Atlanta school would be ignored in favor of some other school. Modern Du Boisian and emancipatory sociologists point out that the inaccurate depiction of the Chicago School as the first American school of sociological thought was likely due to Merton's being white, because we know that Du Bois's writings preceded Merton's chronologically. Yeah, you should be tweeting right now. So either tweeting in your WooClap messages or on Twitter. But again, knowing this is our very first lecture is incredibly low stakes. So this is a trial, and if you do not get to commenting this round, that's okay. We have a lot more lectures, so you can just always pick it up next time. So, what is a school of thought and why is it important? Schools of thought tend to designate theoretical paradigms in the field of sociology. It's considered an honor of great esteem to have one's theoretical ideology classified as a school, as it indicates that the field widely accepts one's theoretical ideology as grand, so that you are a grand theorist. Here also designating your theory as a precursor to other canon theories operating at the meso or micro level. So here that you were a precursor to contemporary theory. In this case, to erase Du Bois as a founder of American sociology is to dismiss Du Boisian theory as fundamental to the canonic big three. So thinking back to your intro class, we can see Du Bois in structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. The result is going to be the understanding that these are three distinct paradigms rather than one Du Boisian paradigm, and that they emerged from the Chicago School and or some combination, including the Harvard and Columbia School later on. Additionally, there's this understanding of the Chicago School of Sociology as the first, and it has its journal, the American Journal of Sociology, becoming one of the most, if not the most esteemed due to its first designation. So here seeing really the lasting impacts of these structural processes. So, Bloomer's criterion for designating a school of thought reinforced that the Atlanta School is a school of sociology and that it was the first. So interestingly, the Chicago School fails to meet all of these criteria. The criteria here are going to be as follows. So first, that your school is organized around a central figure. Here, the Atlanta School is organized around Du Bois or Du Boisian theory. It must exist in a university setting and have interaction with students. Atlanta University was the first in the country actually to advertise rigorous and applied research as a main component and a requirement for graduating its sociology program. So think of this capstone requirement. The Atlanta School was the first one to require that for sociology. You have to have faculty interaction with the community. So Du Bois actually founds the NAACP, and he continues other grassroots involvement in the civil rights movement as well. You must have a key figure with a dominating personality. Du Bois was known for speaking his mind. You must have an intellectual vision and a missionary drive. Atlanta University did have a really specific mission. They created their sociology program specifically to train students to research issues in Black communities around the US. 6, your program must have intellectual exchange with graduate students and an outlet for scholarly publication, so really a two-pronged 6. There was a sociology graduate program at Atlanta University, and they actually co-organized a sociology conference, or the Atlanta Conference, with other HBCUs in Atlanta. So they not only had intellectual exchange with their own graduate students, but they also had intellectual exchange with graduate students in other universities in Atlanta. They also created the Atlanta University Press. There must be adequate infrastructure with advances in research methods. We know that survey and interview data analyzed in a study outlined in Du Bois's book, The Philadelphia Negro, established the standard for rigorous empirical research in American sociology. So it is the first positivist or empiricist study to be published in this form here in the US. Your school should not last beyond the generation of a central figure. The Atlanta laboratory stopped publishing shortly after Du Bois left in 1914. And then your school must be open to ideas and influences beyond the home discipline, so beyond sociology, or beyond here inequality. The Atlanta school sets a precedent for what we call subfields in sociology. So they look at a variety of research topics, including crime deviance, business, law, health, and it's because all of these are said to relate to racial identity and experience in the US. So they say that you can't look at inequality without them. And we see that this kind of persists and is a core part of sociology now. We also know that Du Boisian theory is historical sociology. So it's based on this assumption that you must interpret current data with the understanding that circumstances don't emerge in a vacuum. So history is going to matter a lot. Remember I said the Chicago school doesn't meet all of these criteria. It actually fails to meet criteria 8 and 9, most notably 8, due to what are called sometimes an iconoclastic group of sociologists after Merton emerging from the Chicago School of Thought. Iconoclasting meaning they're almost idolized in sociology. And this, if you are in sociology, you'll start to notice that even people who are at the Chicago School now, it still exists, are kind of thought of as elite in this way. We're going to begin Durkheim, but we may not finish, but that's okay. We will pick up whatever we don't finish on Durkheim before we get to our philosophers on Friday. So Du Bois was the father of American sociology. Emile Durkheim is considered the father of sociology broadly. So Durkheim was a French theorist who built on the work of Auguste Comte, but his work far eclipsed Comte. This is important because Comte came up with this term sociology, but that was really the extent of his contributions once Durkheim came into play. Some would consider Durkheim to be the most important theorist in the history of global sociology. Some people in American sociology might contest that and argue that Du Bois is in that role. He is to French European sociology what Du Bois is to American sociology. So whether it's sociology broadly, unclear, but we do know that Emile Durkheim is considered the father of European sociology. He achieved a pretty esteemed rank of professor at La Sorbonne, which is Paris's self-proclaimed most elite university. They're also known for almost an entire topic that we'll be speaking about later, postmodernism. And a significant portion of Durkheim's theory deals with the impact of the changing division of labor in society and the transition from mechanical to organic society. Durkheim believed that societies progressed from what he calls primitive mechanical societies to modern organic societies. He says that this occurs primarily through changes in the division of labor. People living in pre-modern and pre-industrial societies are said to be held together by a mechanical solidarity where people share a strong collective conscience and general skill set. People living in modern industrialized societies, on the other hand, were supposed to be held together by organic solidarity, where people are mutually dependent as they become specialized in their contributions. So they don't do everything themselves, so they have to kind of outsource. These three propositions constitute the assumptions underlying Durkheimian theory, so keep them in mind as we examine the secondary propositions and some of his associated concepts. So the transition from mechanical to organic solidarity is driven by what Durkheim considers an increase in dynamic density. Dynamic density has two components, and I have this outlined on this chart here. You see number of people and increased cooperative interactions paired with competition for resources, leading to increased dynamic density. And you can see that it's driving this process of mechanical solidarity, leading to organic solidarity. Coming from this shift, we see specialization, which leads to the division of labor. The changes in the division of labor in society are accompanied by a major change in what Durkheim called the collective conscience. Durkheim describes this collective conscience as the ideas shared by members of the collectivity, such as a group, a tribe, or a society. So your cultural values. In a mechanical society, the collective conscience is powerful and rigid. So people very much share the same ideals. In organic society, the collective conscience is said to be weaker. Less people collectively share the same strong convictions that motivate their behavior. A good example of this is looking at the polarization in the US political system right now. That would be good evidence in support of Durkheim's concept of organic society. The predominance of type of law in a society, according to Durkheim, illustrates that society has changed from mechanical to organic, and in organic society, that the power of the collective conscience has declined. So here, how do we know that this is happening? Well, we have to look at what the law looks like. Mechanical society enlists restitutive law, so it punishes individuals severely for deviance because these offenses are shocking to a common morality. Organic society enlists repressive laws where the common morality is weaker, and thus deviant offenders are paid back their debts for deviant offenses. So here that we have things like prison, that we have a judicial system, and that this is not applied equally. And then this is a good place to end. So I'll end here with anomy. Anomy is going to be the collective sense of not knowing what you're supposed to do. And it's considered a potential problem of organic society where the power of the collective conscience has declined. So you can see kind of an increasing collective conscience here on the chart when you're still in that specialization phase. But once you move to division of labor, collective conscious decreases and you end up with anomy. So here, the sense of what is often called normlessness. You just don't know how to act. The rules are unclear. I'm going to end there for today, and we will finish Durkheim before we start with the philosophers on Friday.